I was on sabbatical back in September, and the Lord laid it on my heart that we had to start a prayer time in our services. That right there was exactly what I think He had in mind the whole time. We're finishing up our series on the kingdom. How many of you've been all 7 weeks of the kingdom? Anybody? Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, 7 in a row. We're finishing this thing up, but we're not leaving this idea of the kingdom behind either. Next week, we're starting a new teaching series called The Adventures of Selfish and Stupid. And if you've been around here for a while, you know that this is the series title that I use when we're going to talk about relationships. So this is the trilogy that we're kicking off next week, because it'll be our third time getting into selfish and stupid. So if you want to know how to do relationships the way that kingdom people do relationships, that's what we're going to cover for the next 6 weeks. Start next week. If you got people that are in some messed up relationships, having a hard time in their marriage, their friendships, whatever it might be, this coming series is going to be for you. But before we get there, I want to finish out the kingdom. And we've been talking about, once I'm in the kingdom, what does it look like? And last week, we were talking about holiness, and that people in the kingdom, we have this inner transformation that leads to all the things outwardly that people see about us. And truthfully, it's one of those sermons. Again, if you ever listen to just one sermon of mine, and you find yourself a little like taken back or off put, right? You go, well, listen, it's part of a larger conversation that has to be had, right? The reason why sermon series are what they are is because the kingdom is really about 8-hour-long sermon, but you wouldn't sit through it, so I have to break it up over 2 months. So if you only heard last week and you walked away going, I don't know if I can live like that. In fact, I know I don't live like that, so maybe I'm not a kingdom person. That's why you got to listen to this week, right? So that's what we need for this week. Because let me tell you, I've told you a little bit of my personal story, but let me get specific. There was one time in high school, I went to church camp. I was not yet a Christian, or at least I didn't consider myself a Christian. I went to church camp for the same reason teenage boys go to church camp. There's a lot of pretty girls there. So I went to church camp for that reason. But something weird happened. On the very first night of that church camp, I felt God speaking to me. Summersville campground, the Nazarene campground up there, I felt God speaking to me. And I walked forward at the end of that service and gave my life to Jesus, or at least I thought I did. Because in my mind, all the Christians that I knew, after they prayed that prayer, I thought that they got their crap together pretty quick. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I were to plot out what I thought other Christians' journeys looked like after they said yes to Jesus, this is what I thought it would look like. That it started here, and it was just all up and to the right. Just, smooth sailing. They said yes to Jesus, and I was like, wow, they didn't have another issue at all. Like, they always got it right. They didn't backslide. They didn't make mistakes. They just, every chance they got it right. That's what I thought Christianity was. Which is why when I went and I prayed that prayer at that church camp, for that week while I was there in that nice little Christian bubble, isn't it easy to be a Christian in a little Christian bubble? But the second that you step out of it, you come home from camp, and then you're back into your normal ways of life, you're back in your normal rhythms, that's when your faith really gets tested. So for that whole week, man, I was like, yes, Jesus, yes, Jesus. When I got home, I went to baseball practice, was the first thing I did, and I was right back to who I was. Like, just and it started in my head, I was going, I don't think that prayer worked. I thought when I prayed, Jesus saved me, that I wouldn't be the same person anymore. And you know what? I felt largely like the same person. And I was like, all the other Christians I know had these radical transformations where they went from here and there, and they're not like that anymore, so there must be something wrong with me. So later that night, I come home, my whole family's in bed. I can tell you the specifics of this because it marked me so bad that I still see images of it. I was sitting at home, everyone else is already in bed, flipping through the channels, already feeling like, man, last week that was so cool when I was doing that Jesus thing, but now I've already failed. Flipping through the channels, I find the Howard Stern show. Don't act like you don't know what that is. Good Christian people. Going through it, half-naked woman on there. I'm a teenage boy. I stopped, and I watched the whole thing. At the end of it, here was what I decided. That prayer didn't work. I'm not a Christian, and I'm walking in the other. In fact, I'm not even going to continue to pretend anymore. Because there for a while, because I was a kid raised in church, I would pretend so that I wouldn't embarrass my family. I was like, I'm not even going to pretend anymore. This thing didn't work. See, what happened was I became so discouraged that when I prayed that prayer and I still had all the same issues that I had before that, I woke up and I was still mean and gossiping and all this other stuff that I used to be. I was still filled with lust and pride, and I was like, well, it just didn't work. So to be honest, I got very discouraged, and I started to get this mindset like there are certain people that they're just really good rule followers from birth, and those people are allowed to be Christians. And then there's other people like me that we're not natural rule followers, and Christianity's just not for us. Now, let me tell you how miserable this is to live like this. I was a teenager and a young adult. I did not go the route of many others that, I went to atheism or other religions or anything like that. No, listen. I lived every day of my life believing Jesus was who he said that he was, that the Bible is true, but that it wasn't for me because I couldn't get my crap together. Thinking I would always find myself on the outside of the faith community because I wasn't a natural rule follower. And I got discouraged. I got disheartened. To be honest, I ended up quite disillusioned about Christianity, going, I believe it, and I think it's great for people that can do it, but apparently I can't do it. Anybody else had a similar situation? You know how your spiritual enemy, you know how he gets us to actually walk away the way that I did? Is he convinces us that we're the only ones in that situation. But the truth be told, all of us have probably been there before. Where it's like no matter how good my intentions are, I continue to fail. I continue to fall back. I continue to do what I wish that I would not do. And then we go to church with all these other people that look like they got it together, and we're going, you know what? Why am I not having the same experience as everybody else? Maybe you are, but maybe not everyone else is being as honest about their experience as you are. So if you feel caught in a situation like that, I want to remind you, this is what we said last week. The discipleship process, people in the kingdom, that discipleship process, it's messy. It doesn't actually look like this at all. And so before you get disillusioned and think Christianity's not for you, that you're too far gone, that when you pray, nothing ever seems to change, there's no hope for me, I want to introduce you to one of Jesus' closest friends. And you can tell, I got the podium out, I got the whiteboard. This is going to be a little different than what we normally do. I want to tell you the life story of a guy named Peter, and I want to show you one thing that Peter did despite all the ups and downs in his life. One thing that he did that we can learn from today, that if you feel like you're caught in that like no matter what you do, you don't ever measure up, and even if you get it right one day, you get it wrong the next day, and you're tired of that back and forth. I got something for you today, because here's what we're going to learn. Kingdom people are not perfect. See, I thought Christians were perfect. Kingdom people are not perfect, but they are progressing. So I'm not going to prop you up in your sin and tell you everything's okay, just stay the way that you are. No. Kingdom people are not perfect, but they are progressing. Let me show you this through the life, and I'm telling you, this is going to be a lot of scriptures. You may want to take notes. You may want to make your own little diagram with me. We're going to learn this through a guy named Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and he saw two brothers, one named Simon, who we call Peter, the other Andrew, throwing a net into the water because they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them. They said, "Come and follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. Jesus calls Peter to come and follow him, just like he has called you to come and to follow him. And Peter's journey begins. He's on the faith journey. He says yes. Story goes on. Matthew chapter 8 tells us that one time Jesus' 12 disciples were in a boat. A big storm hits. When the big storm hits, the disciples become afraid. But Jesus was down at the bottom of the boat sleeping. Disciples went and woke him up, shouting, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Now listen, Peter was a fisherman. He's part of the group of disciples that's freaking out because of the storm. Peter, up to this point, you have seen Jesus work miracles. You've seen his teachings. He called you to come and follow him, and plus you're a fisherman. Why are you losing your mind out on this rough seas? Why? So they wake him up. Jesus responds, "Why are you so afraid? You have so little faith?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. And the disciples said, "Who is this man? Even the winds and waves obey him." So Peter, you started the journey. You saw all sorts of miracles up to this point. You've seen who Jesus is, and the first time things get tough for you, you lose faith and have to be rebuked by Jesus. Ain't that wild? Matthew chapter 10, story goes on. It's time for Jesus to send his disciples out to do ministry. In Matthew chapter 10, it says this: Jesus called the 12 disciples together and gave them authority to cast out evil spirits and heal every kind of disease and illness. Okay, look at this. Despite the fact that Peter and the other guys had just failed, Jesus said, "I'm not finished with you. I'm sending you out to do ministry, to preach the message of the kingdom and to cast out evil spirits and to do miracles." Amen. But we got it wrong. Yeah, you did. But I'm not done with you. We messed it up. Yeah, but there's more to do. Matthew chapter 14. Peter gets to be a part of another story where all the disciples are together with Jesus up on a hillside. Jesus is preaching to probably, scholars will tell you, anywhere from 15 to 20,000 people. It gets late at night. There's not enough food to feed all these people. Jesus says to the disciples, "You feed them." So they go and they take a kid's lunch from them. Jesus multiplies it. Peter gets to be on the front lines of taking that food that's now going to be multiplied from one little lunch to feed 20,000 people. He gets to be one of them that passes it out. He also gets to be the one that helps pick up 12 baskets of leftovers. He gets to be part of a miracle. I'd say that's probably up and to the right. Matthew chapter 14, the story gets even better. Right after that feeding of the 5,000, the guys go back out in the boat. Jesus sends them back across the lake. A big storm hits. They begin to freak out again. Why do these fishermen continue to freak out every single time they're on? I mean, had they never been through this before? Jesus sees them struggling. He comes to them walking on the water. 12 guys in the boat, only one of them is daring enough. Peter says this in Matthew 14:28. He says, "Lord, if that's really you out there, walking on the water, tell me to come to you." Walking on the water. "Yes," Jesus said, "come." So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on water towards Jesus. What? That's amazing. The only one out of all 12 that had the faith to get out of the boat and put his feet on the water with Jesus? That's amazing. And then verse 30, as soon as he saw the strong winds and waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me," the Lord shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" You ever had one of those moments in your life where you feel like you were absolutely crushing it? And then in the blink of an eye, you were right back there. Everything was going so good. I'm walking on water with Jesus. And then I got distracted. I got my eyes off of Jesus. When I got my eyes off of Jesus, I began to sink. Matthew chapter 16. This is one of the pinnacle moments of Peter's life. They're outside an area called Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asked the guys, he says, "Who do people say that I am?" They start giving all these answers. John the Baptist, this guy, that guy. He looks right at Peter. He says, "But Peter, who do you say I am?" And in the moment of Peter's life, he looks at Jesus and says, "I believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus responds, that's exactly who I am. And you didn't find that out on your own. My Father in heaven told you that's who you were. He said, upon that proclamation, Peter, that you just had, that's what I will build my church on, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Can you imagine the spiritual high Peter's on right there? That's right after his failure. Right after he had just messed it up, he had just sank, took his eyes off Jesus. The next chance that he gets, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Nails it. Matthew 16, same chapter that he just said what he said. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Right after this conversation, Matthew writes that Jesus tells the disciples, guys, we're going to go to Jerusalem. When I go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be killed. Here's Peter's response. He takes Jesus to the side. Come on, Jesus, let's have a little talk. He says, heaven forbid, Lord, this will never happen. Jesus responds, Peter, get away from me, Satan. You're a dangerous trap to me. You're seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's point of view. Wait a second. The same guy that just said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, the next chance that he's faced with the plan of God in his life, he goes, no, Jesus, we're not going to do it like that. We can't do it like that. And he literally goes from, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, to get behind me, Satan, in the same day. Anybody had a day like that? Anybody? Right? You woke up, you did your quiet time, you read the Bible, you prayed. Man, you showed up, you didn't yell at the kids when they were getting ready for school. Everybody was on time. You did your job at work to the best, like you were putting Jesus' name on it. You were a good husband or a wife or a friend. I mean, you was just killing it. And then later that night, something happened and you just lost your temper. Boom! And it was like you threw the whole day away, didn't you? Yeah, like you just discounted everything that came before it because of that one failure, and all you can focus on is that one failure. He went from, this is the pinnacle, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Get behind me, Satan. In the same day, in the same chapter. Matthew 17. Jesus is getting ready to do something phenomenal. He's about to take 3 of his closest disciples up onto a mountain where he's going to show himself to them in all of his glory. 12 disciples. He's only going to take 3 up for this unbelievable privilege. Only 3 of them. Peter is chosen in the top 3. Yeah, the one that just got called Satan is in the top 3. What? That's got to feel good. Jesus takes them up on this mountain. We call this the Mount of Transfiguration. He shows himself in all of his glory to these 3 guys. 2 prophets show up. Next thing you know, this thing is amazing that's going on. And Peter is so enthralled by it and taken by it. Of course, he does what so many of us do when we ought not to. He opens his big mouth and ruins everything. He goes, oh, Jesus, we should build shelters and we should just stay up here because up on the mountain, we don't have to deal with the pains of life on the other side, down in the valley. Jesus is like, that's not what we're doing, Peter. You really just don't get it. So he got chosen to be part of it, and then he opens up his big mouth. Messes it up again. Later on in Matthew chapter 17, there's a story where the religious officials ask Peter, why does Jesus not pay the temple tax? So he goes and talks to Jesus about it. Jesus asks him a question where Peter gets the answer exactly right, and he goes, all right, Peter, but we are going to pay that temple tax. Here's how we're going to do it. Go down to the water. The first fish that you pull out, in that fish's mouth will be a coin that's big enough to go and to pay our temple tax. He got sent on a mission from Jesus that he got to become part of a miracle where he took a gold coin or of some sort out of a fish's mouth. That's pretty cool. Matthew chapter 19. Here's the story. One day, some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay their hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering them. Now, they didn't teach us this in seminary. I don't have any special knowledge whatsoever. But if I was a betting man, who the ringleader of telling the kids that they're not allowed to come to Jesus was, it would probably be the abrasive, big mouth, can't get it right for anything fisherman at the head. And either way, he was part of it, and next thing you know, Jesus rebukes them and says, don't stop the children from coming for me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And he was just on his way back up before he comes back down. And then in John chapter 13, Jesus is at the Last Supper. This is the night he's going to get arrested. John chapter 13, Jesus is going to wash the disciples' feet. He's going to institute communion, all these different things. And at the end of it, he tells the disciples, one of you is going to betray me. He goes on talking even more, and this is, we pick it up in John 13:36. Peter asks, Lord, where are you going? He says, you can't go with me, but you will follow me later. He says, but why can't I? Lord, I'm ready to die for you. Well, that's pretty cool, right? For a guy that failed so much, his heart posture is still, Jesus, I know I haven't always gotten it right, but I would give everything for you. That's strong. That's a strong declaration of his faith. Matthew chapter 26, Jesus, after the Last Supper, he takes his 12 disciples to a garden called Gethsemane. Once again, he chooses 3 to go deeper. This is going to be his prayer warriors because they're going deeper into the garden to pray. He chooses Peter. Yeah, Peter gets chosen to go into the garden and pray. So he leaves 8 of the disciples over here. He takes 3 with him. Judas has already gone to betray Jesus. He leaves the 3 guys here. He goes, listen, in my hour of need, here's what I need you to do. I need you to pray. Pray because something's getting ready to happen. So he leaves the 3 there to pray. He goes on further to pray by himself. He goes over here. He prays. When he comes back, you know what he finds Peter and the other 2 doing? Dead asleep. In Jesus' hour of need, he needed them to pray with him. They fall asleep. He goes, that's fine. Let me give you another chance. You guys pray. I'll be back. He goes. He prays longer. Second time he comes back, he finds Peter sleeping again. All right, Pete, one more time. Will you watch and pray? He walks off to pray. He comes back, finds them asleep again. That was Jesus' hour of need. He goes back, he wakes them up, he tells the guys, he goes, okay, my hour's finally come. Here come the betrayer, here come the ones that are going to arrest me. So the disciple Judas that's going to betray Jesus walks up, kisses Jesus on the cheek. Jesus surrenders himself, says, do to me what you came to do. And as the religious officials, their guards come to seize Jesus, Matthew must have had a special relationship with Peter. Because Matthew writes in chapter 26, one of the disciples pulls out a sword and chops off the ear of the high priest, servant. Matthew just gets one of the disciples. John has a different approach in his gospel. If you read John goes, it was Peter. Like, we're not going to let that get lost in history. It was Peter. Everybody knows it was Peter. Jesus says, Peter, put away your sword. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. We're not fighting back. This is what's supposed to happen. And so, pretty bad. Matthew 26, a little bit later, after they now arrested Jesus, they're taking him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of religious law and the elders had all gathered to hold this trial for Jesus. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat down with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. When everyone else abandoned Jesus, Peter had not given up. Even though it wasn't the smartest idea, he still had not given up. And he finds himself sitting out in the courtyard with the guards. And as he's out there, Matthew chapter 26, I'll make a long story short, tells us that 3 different times these little servant girls come up to this big burly fisherman, and they say, you were with that Jesus guy. I've never met him. No, your accent. You're from Nazareth. You have to be with him. I've never met the guy. And a third time, no, you are with him. And it says he calls down curses and once again denies that he even knows Jesus. It says after that, the rooster crows and Peter went out and wept bitterly. Let me ask you this. If that was you, would you feel pretty strongly that Jesus was probably done with you? Right? A lot of us, we've done not even near what Peter did and thought God was done with us. Because we didn't have it all together. We thought God must be done with me. He must be really angry with me. He must be ready to get even with me for what I have done. I bet Peter thought for a moment God was done with him. In fact, if you go to John's gospel and look at the narrative surrounding the crucifixion, only one disciple shows up to watch Jesus get crucified, and it's not Peter. Peter's nowhere to be found. He is so overwhelmed with his guilt and shame, he doesn't even show up in Jesus' hour of need. I'm certain he thought, this time I've done it. This time I've gone too far. This time God must really be finished with me. You ever been there in your life before? Just thinking God must be really frustrated with you and done. He doesn't want anything else to do with you. Then something amazing happens. Jesus is killed. He's laid in a tomb. On Sunday, a lady named Mary Magdalene and some of the other ladies who had followed Jesus decided that they were going to go to the temple and embalm the body of Jesus. They wake up early that Sunday morning. They walk to the tomb where they watched him be placed in there. When they arrive, the stone is rolled away. The body is not there. There's an angel there with a message for Mary Magdalene. This is what he says. Now go and tell the disciples, including Peter, that Jesus has gone ahead of you into Galilee, and you'll see him there just as he told you before he died. This is one of the most powerful verses maybe in all the Bible, and here's why. Right, the next thing that you see after Peter's greatest failure was that God has that angel mention him by name to Mary to make sure that when she gets back to tell the 11 disciples that Jesus is risen, he has a special message for Peter who thought God was done with him, and it was this: Peter, he knows that you messed up, but he's not finished with you yet. He's not finished with you yet. So there was a special word for Peter. Make sure Peter knows he's alive. This is not the end of your story. Your failure does not have to be the end of your story. And when Mary Magdalene comes back, she tells the guys, hey, he's alive. John tells us this. Luke tells us this, that Peter and John took off running towards the tomb. Why? Because just as we found out that God wasn't finished with Peter, Peter wasn't finished with God either. He wasn't giving up either. The story was going to continue. So he runs to the tomb. He might have been down here, but he was on his way back up. It didn't have to be the end of the story. John chapter 21. This is after Jesus has been resurrected. He had shown himself to the disciples a couple of times, but we get the sense from John chapter 21 that there was still some unfinished business with Peter. That even though Peter had seen it, maybe there were some things that needed to be done, some steps that needed to be taken. So John chapter 21, Peter and some of the guys are out on a boat, once again fishing. A guy on the shore yells to them, throw the net on the other side. When they do so, they pull in such a great catch, they go, we've seen this before. We know who that is on the shore. John looks to Peter and goes, it's the Lord. Now listen, if you were right on the heels of your greatest failure in your life and you knew that you had let Jesus down in his hour of need, you fell asleep in the garden, you denied him in the courtyard, and you weren't even present at the crucifixion. If you had gone through that much failure in your life, that he was standing on the shore, you know how many of us would have tried to row that boat as far in the opposite direction as we possibly could? No, I'm too far gone. We got to get this boat going the other way because there's no way he wants anything to do with me. We might have been so overwhelmed with shame and guilt. You know what John 21 tells us? That Peter jumps out of the boat and begins to run to Jesus. Begins to run to Jesus. I told you, I'm going to give you one thing from the life of Peter, that if you'll continue to do it, your story continues on, and that's this. When you mess up, do not run from God. Continue to run to him. Yes. Don't hide from him. Don't decide that you're finished, that you're too far gone. When you mess it up, run to Jesus. When you fall short, run to Jesus. Do not hide from him. Do not try to excuse it away. Run to Jesus. Because Peter runs to Jesus. Jesus takes him off to the side, fixes him breakfast. And as they're talking, because this is what it all comes down to, is this question that Jesus asked Peter. He says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, Lord, you know I do. Jesus asks him again a second time, Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I do. And a third time, Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know. 3 times he asks him why, to reverse the 3 times that he got it wrong, because Jesus was not finished with Peter. He just wasn't done. And so Peter, though he's down here, Jesus restores him. And he's on his way back up again. I'm not going to plot the rest of these. Let me run you through what happens next. Acts chapter 2. The day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit comes. One of the disciples steps forward, preaches a sermon in front of a large crowd where 3,000 people give their life to Jesus that day. The disciple that stepped forward to preach, that was Peter. Acts chapter 3, Peter is walking by a man that is lame. He says, I don't have silver or gold, but what I do have, in the name of Jesus, get up and walk, and he heals him. Acts chapter 4, despite being told repeatedly over and over, stop preaching that gospel of the kingdom, Peter, despite all of it, continues to preach boldly the gospel of the kingdom that had been entrusted to him. In Acts chapter 5, when Ananias and Sapphira lied to the Holy Spirit about the money that they sold property and gave to the church and all that, it was Peter who comes in and confronts them of their sin. In Acts chapter 10 and chapter 11, it's Peter who has a vision from Jesus that said that all the Gentiles, all the non-Jews were going to be included in the kingdom, and he was told to go to a man named Cornelius' house, and at Cornelius' house he would share the gospel message, and Cornelius, his whole family, got saved right on the spot because God wasn't done with Peter. In Acts chapter 12, Peter's arrested for preaching the gospel when he was told not to, and then is miraculously freed from prison. In Acts chapter 15 and Galatians chapter 2, Peter stands next to Paul in support to declare the salvation is by faith and not by works. Now it seems like Peter's catching some wind. Remember, he's not perfect, but he's progressing. That's right. And before you think, well, Peter, all of Peter's failures were behind him, go read Galatians chapter 2, 11 to 13. Paul tells us in those verses that he had to rebuke Peter for going backwards in the way that he treated Gentiles. So just when it seems like Peter's finally getting it all together, he starts holding Gentiles at arm's length, not treating them as co-equals in the kingdom, and he gets rebuked by Paul for that. But we get the sense that his story, even though he failed once again, wasn't over, because we have letters from Peter later on in our New Testament called 1st and 2nd Peter, and then we are told by the church history that sometime between 64 and 68 AD, that under the Roman Emperor Nero, that Peter was crucified upside down because he said he was not worthy to be killed in the same manner of his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He didn't always get it right, but he never stopped running towards Jesus. And that's what you had. Like, where is the nice, neat line that I was looking for? The up and to the right. Where's the nice, neat line at? That I thought that's what they were teaching me in church, the nice, neat, up and to the right. Everything's good. You ain't going to struggle no more. Well, you ain't going to fall back into that. You're a new creation, all that. Yes, and you are. But that does not mean that your process will not be messy. You are a new creation. God has brought new creation, but it is all in process. And the best thing you continue to do is just continue to run to Him. Every time that you're convinced that your story is over, just like I was sitting on that couch watching Howard Stern, convinced that my story was over, I took off running from Jesus for many, many, many years. And I should have ran to Him in that moment to realize that He wasn't finished with me. So no matter who you are, where your journey takes you, don't give up. Keep running to Jesus. Don't let the enemy take you out. God always has more for you. There is always going to be more grace in Jesus than there is sin in you. There's always more grace in Jesus than there is sin in you. You are not perfect. I am not perfect. We're not going to pretend that we are. We're going to be real open and honest about our stories. Not perfect, but definitely progressing more and more like Him every single day. And whenever I do fall, I know that His grace is there to catch me, and my story continues as long as I continue to run after Him. So if you're in here and maybe you were like me, you thought, there's no way I can do this thing. There's no way I can do this Christianity thing. There's too many rules, too much. It's going to cost me too much. I can't do it. Today, run to Jesus. Or maybe you've been doing it for a while, but the failures have really been piling up, and you've been wondering, man, is there still hope for me? Is my story still going? This morning, run to Jesus. Don't run from Him. Don't hide. Don't try to act like you didn't do what you did. He's standing there just like He was for Peter. And you're in that boat and you have the decision, am I going to row the opposite direction, or am I going to jump out and run to Him and decide that His grace is so much bigger than my failures? If you need to pray, we got prayer counselors that'll be up here for you. Altars are open. The prayer room's open. If you're online, we'd love for you to send us a message. But look, if you need to run to Jesus today to continue the story, let's do that. Let's do that every single day. Let's never stop running to Jesus. That's the one thing that we can take from the story.